Welcome to the entertaining world of ABC Video. A world of exciting programs for you to enjoy and collect. From Australiana to Australian comedy, great sporting events to the great days of steam. A world of entertainment for you to collect now on ABC Video.
Hello and welcome to Consuming Passions, the video. Yes, it's finally happened in response to huge viewer request from right around Australia and from Asia, plus the occasional threatening letter. I finally put together some of the most requested recipes so that you can enjoy them at your leisure. So sit back, relax, enjoy viewing the video, and then get into the kitchen and get cracking. Bon appetit. This is a loaf of commercial bread, bought in supermarkets. Compress it, squeeze it really tight. Now, compare that with this, the bread you make yourself, which is easy, cheap, and don't let anyone tell you any differently. And this is all you need to make your bread. Flour, a kilo of plain or wholemeal or a mixture of both. Just wholemeal tends to make the bread a little heavy. 750 mils of water, a little salt, and the ingredient which strikes fear into the hearts of even the most competent cooks, yeast. Now, it looks harmless, doesn't it? But for some reason, people get very nervous around it. Certainly, yeast is alive, but it's user-friendly, and you can use it fresh and get it in most supermarkets these days, like this, or you can buy the sachet variety. You'll need about 50 grams of the live yeast or a couple of sachets of dried. A couple of extra ingredients you can use. There's sugar, which will help the dough rise and also give it some flavour. And you can use oil to give a spongier, richer texture to the dough. Okay, now for the fun part, where we put this lot together. Toss in the flour. It really doesn't have to be a kilo. You can really play with this. The mixture can be sloppy, it can be a bit firm. We can finalise the consistency later by adding water or adding flour. So just put a bit of this in. There's probably about a kilo in there. Add the water. Add the salt. Be fairly generous as long as we don't mind salt. The sugar and the oil. Sprinkle in the yeast, about 50 grams, a bit more, and we stir it all away. Cover that now with a damp tea cloth and leave it to prove for about an hour. So, the dough should have risen. Let's have a look. Double in size. It's a bit sloppier than it was when we started, but we can soon fix that up when we start kneading it. Let's just get it out of here. So this is it straight from the pan. It is a little sloppy, so we can afford to put some more flour on the board. And we start working it in. Now, this is the fun part. It is the therapy. It's great exercise, and you don't have to knead it for as long as a lot of people think. But we do have to knock some of that air out of it that happened during the proving. So it only remains now to shape the loaf or the bread tin, which can be pretty rough and ready, pretty much like that. We'll double in size again, but that's just about right. And once more, we cover it with a cloth and leave it for another hour. So the time is up. Let's see how our bread has risen. And yes, it has risen. All it remains to do now is simply put it in the oven. But first, I usually sprinkle a little flour over the top. You can, in fact, use glazes, but I find it too complicated. It's much easier to do this. It still gives you a texture, and it's off to the oven. 200 degrees, approximately. And it's in there for about 3/4 of an hour. Okay, the moment of truth. Smells fantastic, looks terrific, but is it cooked? We'll soon see. You just have to tap its bottom. It sounds hollow, it's cooked, and it sounds hollow, it is cooked. If it wasn't cooked, it goes back in the tin. This one is perfect. And so to the final test, the taste test. Just see how we went. Now, one of the best ways of proving your bread is to have it hot with olive oil, virgin olive oil, and some crushed garlic. Plus a small glass of red wine. Bon appetit. Magnificent.
It's more like a pear.
It's more like a pear.
I think it's a bit like a pear, a crisp pear. It's juicy and it's very succulent. Has just a lovely flavour.
Now, when is the season for these?
This is sometime between March and July, something like that.
The Japanese, all our hosts in Japan just peel them and slice them and serve them to us on a plate and say, please sit down here, and they bring them to us.
Better than a pear. Sweeter taste, crunchy and juicy.
Yes, it tastes a bit like a pear, but it's shaped a lot like an apple. What is it? It's a nashi. It came from the Orient. In fact, nashi is Japanese for pear. And this versatile fruit was once regarded as a delicacy by Japanese emperors. It's now found its way onto Australian palates. In fact, it's successfully grown here in Australia, mostly in the Goulburn Valley of Victoria. Although they're thirst-quenchingly crunchy to eat, just as they are, they're also terrific in salads. One of the beauties of using the nashi is that, unlike apples, they don't get browned off when they've been cut. Today, in Consuming Passions, my favourite salad using nashi, and loosely based on the Waldorf salad, but instead of apple, I use nashi fruit. I also use some lettuces, a couple for variation, in flavour and texture, some celery, a few cherry tomatoes for beautiful sweetness and colour again, some pecan nuts, or you can use walnuts if you can't get pecans, and I make it a complete meal with the addition of a couple of skinless chicken breasts gently poached for about 10 minutes in chicken stock with a couple of bay leaves. And what makes the salad special, apart from the nashi and the chicken, is homemade mayonnaise. You know, making your own is simple and rewarding. It's a bit of culinary magic, turning a lot of liquid ingredients into a beautiful, thick cream. If you've never tried it, it's worth it. It can be done in a blender, but I find it's more satisfying to make it in the traditional way in a bowl, with a whisk. Now, you need an egg yolk, and if you still have problems separating the yolk from the white of an egg, a good way is to crack the egg on a saucer, break the whole egg into the saucer, put 1/2 of the eggshell back over the yolk, and tip it into a bowl, leaving the egg yolk. Now, we put the egg yolk into a bowl and squeeze in the juice of 1/2 a lemon. You can use vinegar here. I like to use sometimes a wine vinegar. The best of the wine vinegars are balsamic vinegars. They've matured like good wine, and they're less acidic than a conventional vinegar. I just now add a good teaspoonful of Dijon mustard. Any mild mustard would do, but Dijon really is the best. And then we start with the tricky part, which is blending in the oil. And the oil I'm using is an extra light olive oil. It has a subtle flavour, and it's low in saturated fats. So it comes with a tick of approval from the National Heart Foundation. Now, this stage is where you need a bit of patience. If you add this too fast, the mixture will curdle. It's a good idea to use a spare pair of hands when you're doing this job. Then if it does curdle, you've got someone else to blame. Now we start dribbling into the mixture the extra light olive oil, drip at a time. And you patiently do this until a cup of oil has been added. Slowly, it will start to thicken. Incidentally, if it does curdle, you can start the process again with a new egg yolk, and you simply pour the curdled mixture very slowly back into the new egg yolk. Dribble at a time, like this. Once it starts thickening, you can actually add the oil a little faster. It's thickened beautifully. It looks and smells delicious. All that remains is to season to taste. I don't use salt. There's usually enough in the Dijon mustard. I do use pepper, white pepper, to keep that pale colour. And you can add lemon juice or vinegar if you believe it needs it. Oh, to our other ingredients now. We've chopped up the pecans, the chicken, the celery, and the nashi, and we just add it to the mayonnaise. Wonderful mixture of crunchiness. And that's it. We pour the mixture over our lettuces, which have been washed 3 times. Once to get out most of the grit, a second time to get out the rest of the grit, and a third time to get out the grit that didn't come out the second time. We sprinkle on some tomatoes, and there it is, our nashi salad. Fantastic. The only thing that remains is to complement it with a good wine. A Chenin Blanc I recommend for this. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. One of the great pleasures of the kitchen, if you enjoy cooking as much as I do, is making your own pasta. Now, I know it's easy to get good pasta just about anywhere these days, but it's so easy to make your own that everyone deserves a go. And all it takes is 2 key ingredients, flour and eggs, and no equipment other than a workbench and a rolling pin. I use a nice number 2 wood. Other optional ingredients could be tomato puree to make your pasta red, spinach to make it green. Some people use chocolate to make theirs brown, herbs for color and flavor, and perhaps a little nutmeg for spiciness. And this is what you do. First, flour. Any flour will do, but the best flour is durum semolina. It's what the professionals use. About 300 grams, and then we make a well in the mound and add an egg for each 100 grams. Notice how yellow that flour is looking. And we stir it up, either with a fork or with the finger. I prefer to use the fingers. It's a very tactile experience. And this is very tricky because we try to mix it up into a pasta paste without spilling it down the side. This will normally take about 5 minutes. There's no other liquid involved. We don't have to add salt. Now, when it starts getting firmer, we can add some of our coloring agent, which will also add a little moisture. Well, that's probably enough. It seems to be a nice, firm ball of dough. Good. This is the pasta dough, which we're going to make into thin egg noodles. We'll clear away the work surface and start rolling with the rolling pin. Turning occasionally. And if it starts to stick, we just throw a little more flour over the top. It takes about 20 years of rolling like this to make a piece about the size of Tasmania. This will take us about 10 minutes. Before we cut this into our noodle lengths, we just have to dry it a little. So we hang it over the rolling pin and put it between two chairs for about half an hour. Now, the ideal accompaniment for this kind of pasta is a straightforward homemade tomato sauce made with tomatoes, capsicum, little garlic, and possibly one or two dried tomatoes and some fresh basil, if you can get it. Finally, the cutting. You take out the rolling pin and fold it over. It doesn't matter if this is torn. And cut it into strips. Let's discard the ends. You can cut them as thick or as thin as you wish. Now, the big test to see if we have actually got noodles. And we have. Look at that. It's like magic. No equipment, no fuss. Perfect spinach noodles. A handful of noodles into the pot. Pasta lovers usually drink red wines with their pasta. With this dish, I find a white Burgundy is absolutely perfect. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. Rice is an unassuming but important little grain which does a big job feeding more than half the world's population. And worldwide, more than 1 billion people grow it. And we in Australia have a big part to play in producing some of the world's finest rice. In fact, rice growing and processing is one of Australia's unsung export success stories. Although the cereal has been grown for at least 5,000 years, we came into it rather late, in the 19th century. Our first success came when farmers in southwestern New South Wales began growing rice between the two great rivers, the Murrumbidgee and the Murray, an area that we now know as the Riverina. Since then, rice has been springing up in Queensland and the north of Western Australia, where rice growing is part of the massive Ord River scheme. The Australian industry has grown to such an extent that close to 1 million tonnes is harvested and processed each year, and of that, a massive 90% goes abroad, exported to overseas governments and private buyers. And it's in such demand that the entire Australian crop is sold each year. And so it should be. Rice is a great food. We should all eat plenty of it. It qualifies for the National Heart Foundation's tick of approval because all plain rice is highly nutritious and low in fat. Welcome to Consuming Passions. Today I'm going to show you how to bring the best out of our Australian rice. It certainly is easy to cook. You need never produce a rice that does this. So today, rice cooking the foolproof way, so that we retain the flavors and we keep all the grains separate as it's intended. We use long grain rice for this. Short grain is fine for dishes like rice pudding and risotto, where it doesn't matter if the grains stick together. Our other ingredients, a little olive oil, an onion, some black pepper, and some water. And the process is simplicity itself. We just chop the onion finely. A medium-sized onion will do for this. Chop it quite manically. Now, in a pan over a high heat, we pour a little olive oil, about a dessert spoonful. Don't forget that although olive oil is low in saturated fat, like other oils, it is still a fat, so we don't want to overdo it. I favor a non-stick pan. It means I use less oil. Now put in the onion and fry for a few minutes until it begins to clarify and soften, but it shouldn't turn brown. I stir in the rice and coat the grains of rice with a little of the oil. This is the pilaf or pilau style of cooking rice, popular in the Middle East and in Asia. After a few minutes, when the rice starts to crackle, I add the pepper, freshly ground black pepper, stir in, and add the water. A couple of cups. Stir well. Turn the heat down and cover. With most long grain rice, white rice, it'll take about 20 to 25 minutes to cook. No peaking until about 15 minutes, when you can have a look. If there's steam in the pan, it means the rice is still absorbing water. If there's no steam and you hear it crackling, it means you're toasting the underside of the rice. Just top up with a little more water, perhaps half a cup at most. A couple of additions to make the rice even tastier and add colour. A few chopped spring onions, using some of the green part as well as the white. Maybe the chopped zest of a lemon, finely chopped. And why not brown a few pine nuts? Delicious. The moment of truth. Off with the lid. Try a grain or two. It should be absolutely perfect. It is. Stir it up well and serve. You'll notice I didn't add any salt. You shouldn't need it, especially if you're serving it with a tasty, savoury dish. Now add the garnishings. Doesn't that look good? Rice foolproof. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. Hello and welcome to Consuming Passions. One of Indonesia's most popular dishes is nasi goreng, literally fried rice. It makes a great lunch, dinner, or even breakfast. I love it for breakfast. And we're going to cook it today, a traditional old recipe using a relatively new ingredient. It's this one, a blend of wild rice and brown rice. It's produced by the Australian Rice Growers Cooperative, and the brown rice is grown in Australia, and the wild rice is grown in North America. In fact, it used to be harvested, probably still is, by North American Indians. It's a wonderful blend which is nutty, full of dietary fibre, and tastes absolutely delicious. Now, although in Indonesia, in nasi goreng, the ingredients can vary from region to region, it's generally agreed that prawns are part of the dish, not big prawns like these Australian ones, pork, onion or spring onion, garlic, of course, and naturally, our rice. I've boiled the rice in lots of plain unsalted water. I don't add salt because that's taken care of in the seasonings later, and I've just drained that. Now, this is how simple it is to make our nasi goreng. Into a pan, a little olive oil. I'm using a light olive oil, and I'm using a non-stick pan. That way I don't need as much oil. I put in the onion, some Spanish onion, and a few spring onions chopped up. They make a nice blend together. Stir those around until they start to soften. And then add garlic. We must let the garlic cook through, but not brown, otherwise it'll become bitter. Stir that up, a couple of minutes for this. And I add in a few pork strips, very finely cut pork, very lean pork. Pork doesn't need very much cooking at all, just a few seconds in a very hot pan. And then prawns are added. And again, the prawns will hardly need any time at all, just a few seconds. And we will be cooking this a bit later with the rice, so it doesn't matter if they're not quite cooked at this stage. Stir those well in. And that's it for now. This stage can be done in advance. Then that's left to stand, and we make a little omelette into another non-stick pan, another tiny amount of oil. Spread that around, add a couple of beaten eggs, and cover that with a lid and leave for a few minutes to turn into a nice firm omelette. It only takes a few moments to cook like this before you have a perfect omelette. Gosh, that was quick. And this is simply cut into strips. The last stage, back to our mixture, back onto the heat, stir it in, and we'll season it with a little reduced salt soy sauce. Stir that well in. A few drops of sesame oil for that wonderful nuttiness. Oh, it smells so good. A little chili sauce, or you could use fresh chilies, a couple of teaspoons of chili sauce, or more if you like it really hot. And once that's well mixed in, we can add the rice, stir in well. Finally, we'll garnish with our egg and some spring onions and a few more of our chopped Spanish onions. And our nasi goreng is ready to serve. And there it is, nasi goreng, served with orange juice followed by coffee. It makes the perfect breakfast, but it's actually perfect any time of day or night. The recipe for this dish, just write to Consuming Passions, ABC Television, Box 9994 in your capital city, enclosing a self-addressed stamped envelope. An Asian dish given an Australian treatment. I call it Aussie goreng. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. Simplicity is the key to most successful cooking. That's the message of Consuming Passions today, as we bring together two distinct flavors in a stir-fry with a difference. Now, as you are no doubt aware, stir-frying is the art of almost burning food, of cooking over big heat with a little oil. It's a very effective way of cooking meat, fish and vegetables. Now, one of our key ingredients today is pork, the other is this, the prune. For some reason, this dried fruit has been the source of ridicule. I can't think why. It's high in fibre, tastes delicious, and complements some meats beautifully. The meat I'll be using is new-fashioned Australian pork. There are now 13 cuts which qualify for the tick of approval from the National Heart Foundation because they're low in cholesterol and low in fat. I'll be using leg steak, which has been cut very thinly by the butcher. Now, the other ingredients are spring onion, little garlic, some onions, some red capsicum. I'll season with black pepper, a little chili sauce, or you could use fresh or dried chilies, and for a marinade, some sherry, some dried coriander, sesame oil, soy sauce, and I'll finish up garnishing with fresh coriander. And this is what you do. Simply cut any remaining fat from the meat, and there really is hardly any left on here. Just take that away. And cut the meat into slices. A tip here is to put the meat in the freezer for an hour or so to bring it down to 0 degrees. It'll make it much easier to cut thinly. Now to the marinade. It really doesn't matter if any one of these ingredients is left out, but it would be better if you could include them all. Sesame oil. For nuttiness, it's very strongly flavoured, so just a few drops. I use chili and ginger sauce, but just chili would do. And again, just a small amount, about a teaspoonful. We don't want to overpower the delicate flavour of the pork. A little sherry, Australian sherry of course. Soy sauce, and here I use a reduced salt variety. And about half a teaspoon of ground coriander. And finally, the pepper. And we marinate the pork pieces in this aromatic mixture, preferably for about 6 hours, or overnight is fine. To the vegetables. With any stir-fry, it's a good idea to have all your vegetables prepared and on hand, because once the process starts, it's very quick. Slice the capsicum into thin strips. Cut the onion into thin slices. Chop up the spring onions using both the white and the green parts. Chop the garlic. And cut the pitted prunes into halves. Now to the exciting part. I've brought the pork and the vegetables to where the action is. The pork's been drained and I've reserved the marinade. I'll be using that later. First of all, into the pan with some onions, the garlic, a tiny amount of olive oil. Just for a couple of minutes, so that they can soften. Then the capsicum, red capsicum for colour, again for a couple of minutes. When the capsicum is softened, we transfer all this into a dish. A little more oil in the wok, and it's in with our pork. Then the prunes, and they won't need cooking, they just need to warm up. And likewise, the spring onions. Doesn't that look a treat? Put the onions, garlic and capsicum back into the wok and stir thoroughly for about another minute or so. The marinade. You don't have to use a wok for a stir fry. A frying pan will do. A tip, if you're using a cast iron wok, is never wash it in soapy water. Just wash it in clean water, and before you put it away, put a film of oil on it. Then next time you cook, you won't need to use as much oil. Make sure there's plenty of heat under the wok. Otherwise, the meat will stew and toughen, which is not what we want. Right, the dish is cooked. Out it comes. Pork and prune stir fry, served on a bed of Australian rice, sprinkled with a little coriander. Oh, beautiful. And to complement it, a glass of Pinot Noir, lightly chilled. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. Today's Consuming Passions features one of my favorite dishes and one of my very favorite ingredients. It's the bay leaf. What a wonderful thing. Of course, this dish requires other ingredients too. Chicken, some leg pieces, some Dijon mustard from Dijon in France, the real thing, a little fresh thyme, some cloves of garlic, a little olive oil for frying, and we'll need 2 liquids to make up a sauce. We use white wine and some chicken stock. Finally, there's brandy. Brandy not for drinking, but for a flambé, a most important part of the process. Now this is how we do it. It's very simple. Simply add a little oil and then put in your chicken pieces. Now you'll notice that I'm using leg pieces here, pieces on the bone, because meat on the bone, when simmered, will stay moist and tender. And the National Heart Foundation recommends skinless chicken wherever possible because most of the fat in chicken is on the skin, so we remove it. Now the garlic may be added at this stage, and there's no big deal with garlic, just crush it to get rid of the shells. And they can actually go in perfectly whole. And we just stir all these over now. Beautifully browned, wonderful. Smells delicious too. And now we come to the exciting part, where we flambe. Now the secret of this is to warm the brandy first. We'll use about a tablespoon. To get the match ready, to light the match, to step back. And that's how it's done. Absolutely perfect, not recommended in kitchens with low ceilings. Oh, that's it. Now we just simply have to add the other ingredients. Our chicken stock and our wine. A little stock. Preferably use your own stock. But if you're going to go and get commercial stocks, look for one that's low in salt. There are some about, or some consomme. And we use about a glass of that and a little splash of our white wine. Time to explode a culinary myth. If a wine's not good enough for drinking, it's not good enough for cooking. Just throw it away. Life's too short to drink bad wine. Now it only remains to turn down the heat to a simmering temperature and add our final ingredients. The Dijon mustard, about a dessert spoon, and the thyme, which we can just slip in there, the bay leaf, we can take those out later. And then I just mix in the Dijon mustard into the bottom of the pan and smear some on the chicken too. It's beautiful. You know, mustard comes from the cabbage family. It's an extraordinary fact, isn't it? And finally, we put the lid on and leave it to simmer for about 40 minutes. The perfect accompaniment for this dish, potatoes cooked in their skins, either baked or boiled or microwaved. But watch out for the ones with green skins. They've got alkaloids in them, and they won't do you any good, so you either peel through the skin or throw them away. And broccoli, which is a member of the brassica family, the same family as cabbage and mustard, perfect accompaniment. the chicken is ready. And you can tell the meat has come away from the bone slightly, which means it's cooked. The sauce has been reduced into a very, very thick, rich sauce, and the garlic is really dissolved beautifully. So it's just a matter of serving that onto the plate. And why not plenty of that garlic? Just wonderful, a little more juice. And it's a good idea to sprinkle a little parsley onto the potatoes, and a little lemon rind onto the broccoli. And all it remains now is to have a healthy appetite and possibly a glass of white wine to go with it. I'd recommend something crisp to go with chicken Dijon. In this case, it's a semillon that we used in the cooking, and we'll have some of that with the food. Bon appetit from Consuming Passions. The time is 5 a.m. The place, the Melbourne Fish Market. The temperature, I didn't dare ask. It's obviously a lot colder for all this fresh fish, the previous day's catch from around the coast of southeastern Australia. The fish is being prepared for auction to merchants, shops and restaurants all around Melbourne. Each year, about 500,000 kilos of fish are sold in this market, all freshly caught in wide, unpolluted waters, and all a natural part of a balanced Australian diet. I've got my eye on this gummy shark, but more of that in a moment. Rod Deadman, the market manager, showed me how to check a fish for freshness. Not that there was any doubt about that in a place like this. And precisely at 6 o'clock, the auction began. By 6:30, it was all over. I went to bed and the fish went to tables throughout Melbourne. And that brings us back to the kitchen and today's Consuming Passions recipe for In a Hurry curry. I've called it that because it's so quick to do. The key ingredient is gummy shark, or you could use any other firm white flesh fish. Now the process is simplicity itself, but this is a Consuming Passions recipe. Into a pan, a little olive oil, light olive oil, and then I mix up some onion with some garlic, 2 or 3 cloves, and some ginger, stir in well and add to the oil. I then stir that up and leave to cook gently for a couple of minutes. Once that's done, we can add our spices. I use cardamom pods, 6 or 7 cardamom pods, remembering to take them out at the end of the cooking, or at least to tell people they're there, just to warn them. A little cumin, about 2 teaspoonfuls, and the same of coriander. If you don't have the fresh spices, well, curry powder will do about a tablespoon of curry powder. Then I add some chili. I use chili sauce, but you could use dried chilies or even fresh chilies. About 2 teaspoonfuls of chili sauce, or if you like it hot, even more. And while they're cooking, we'll start work on our fish fillets. I cut the fish fillet into big cubes. You can smell the sea in this fish, so you can tell how really fresh it is. The beauty of using shark is that they don't have any bones, just cartilage, so you won't get any unpleasant surprises when you're eating it. And now I add a sprinkling of turmeric, otherwise known as poor man's saffron, or these days poor person's saffron. This will give a nice yellow colour to the curry. And it's into the pan with the other ingredients. And that takes us to the last things we add, a little coconut milk and some chicken stock or consommé. About half a cup of coconut milk and about the same of the chicken consommé or stock. Stir in well and add to the fish mixture. And once that's done, simply cover and cook very slowly. A mere hubba, 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 not a raging hubba, hubba. That way the fish will retain its substance, it won't fall apart during cooking, and there's little danger of it overcooking. Consuming Passions In a Hurry fish curry. It took about 30 minutes to cook, about the same time as the rice I'm serving it on, just a plain brown rice. I've garnished with little spring onion, you could garnish with coriander or a little Vietnamese mint. Now the recipe for this is in the book, The Consuming Passions Cookbook, published by the Heart Foundation. It's available from their offices and ABC shops and centres everywhere. in a hurry fish curry is a mild but spicy curry. And to complement it, an Australian spicy fruity wine such as a Cabernet Rosé, lightly chilled. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. Today, Consuming Passions is in Carnarvon, Western Australia, waiting for our boat to come in. And why? Because this boat is loaded to the gunnels with the best prawns in the world. Look at these, wonderful! Caught fresh in the clear, unpolluted waters of the Indian Ocean, ready for processing and delivery overseas and throughout Australia. For a prawn lover like me, this is close to paradise. There are many ways to cook these little beauties, and as long as you don't overcook them, almost any way is fine. I like mine barbecued, just like Paul Hogan. So today in Consuming Passions, honey prawns. So here we are in this wonderful setting at Carnarvon in Western Australia. We're going to cook some prawns on the Aussie barbie. Two types of prawn here, the king prawn and the tiger prawn. Now, doesn't that look absolutely sensational? And we're going to add to these prawns a sauce made with some wonderful ingredients. And they are some garlic, some ginger, some chilies, some spring onions, a little 5-spice and some soy sauce, maybe a couple of other things. So, first of all, let's deal with the prawns. Either whole prawns in their shells. I actually prefer to take the shell away, which I do simply by removing the head, then squeezing the body shell off and squeezing off the tail. I then clean it by opening up the back and removing the alimentary canal. And if it's very gritty, it can be washed. That's perfect. Now, the main thing about barbecuing prawns or anything like this, seafood, is not to overcook. And in fact, for this recipe, stage 1 requires them to be just slightly undercooked. The thing to remember about cooking any fresh, really fresh fish or seafood is never overcook. Really fresh seafood doesn't need cooking at all. Ask the Japanese. These are not fully white right through, so they are slightly undercooked, which is just how we want them at this stage. These are simply removed onto a plate and left on the side for moments. And onto our other ingredients. Our garlic onto the barbecue plate, our ginger and some chilies and a few spring onions. Just cook these lightly. The ginger will be cooked through in about 2 minutes. The garlic mustn't burn. If it burns, it'll become bitter and twisted, at least bitter anyway. And while these are cooking, we'll make our sauce. Into a bowl, a couple of tablespoons of honey. This is beautiful wildflower honey, also from Carnarvon. Is there anything they don't do up here? A few dribbles of sesame oil, a little black pepper, some 5-spice, a wonderful spice, but don't overdo it. Just about half a teaspoon will be perfect. Some soy sauce, preferably low-salt soy sauce, about a tablespoon, a couple of tablespoons of sherry, and stir it up well. And that's all it takes. Bliss! The rest of the recipe, really simple. Just pour the sauce over the top of our other ingredients, stirring in well. Oh, doesn't that smell wonderful? I wish you could be here. And then put the prawns back on top, stirring over well for just seconds. That's all it takes. And they're ready to serve. Beautiful. How does that smell, guys?
Beautiful.
A final touch to our Western Australian honey prawns, a few spring onions, and some sesame seeds, just a few sprinkled over the top. And there it's complete. Now, this can be done on a barbecue or in a frying pan or wok. And the recipe for the dish is in the Consuming Passions book, published by the National Heart Foundation and available at their offices or ABC shops everywhere. Consuming Passions Honey Prawns. Where better to put this wonderful dish to the test than with the crew of the boat that caught the prawns. Can I come aboard? Oh, right, try that.
Yeah, that's
Another triumph, I suspect, for Consuming Passions. Let's just see. Thumbs up for that one. From Consuming Passions, till next time, bon appetit. Okay, go for it. It's all eat. Ever since Eve tempted Adam with the apple, we've been trying to dress up our most popular fruit to make it even more delicious. And today in Consuming Passions, we're going to do just that with a strudel with a difference. A mystery ingredient which will make it unlike anything you've had before. And the mystery ingredient is... Australian blue cheese. Now, we all know that cheese and apple work very well together. But the simple addition of a small amount of that blue cheese to our tasty dish will have your family and friends gasping with surprise. Now, apples can be any variety, but if you get a chance to get Pink Lady or Sundowner, they're from Western Australia, these are absolutely superb and are available pretty much anywhere in Australia. And to other ingredients. I use commercial phyllo pastry. It's a flaky pastry which is quite impossible to make. I don't know how they do it. A few breadcrumbs, a little sugar. You won't need much because the apples will be sweet. Some lemon juice, a little lemon rind, some ground cinnamon, and I use as optional extra some sultanas and almonds, and also a little light olive oil to brush onto the pastry. And so to the method. We take our apples, 2 or 3 will do, and we chop them into fine pieces. Then as quickly as we can, we put the apple into a bowl. And cover with lemon juice to stop the apple pieces discoloring. And we add our other ingredients. The lemon rind, breadcrumbs, sugar, sultanas, the almonds, and a little bit of cinnamon, about half a teaspoon, and stir up well. It's almost as good as a salad on its own. That's that. A lot of people worry about using phyllo pastry because it's such a sensitive pastry. It can't get too wet or too dry. The answer is one of these. A tea towel, wet it, and then shake out the excess moisture so it's just damp, and put that down under the pastry sheets. From here we work quickly to take out the pastry, to take out about 5 or 6 sheets. That's all we'll need. The others get rolled up and put back into the container. Then we just simply brush on our light olive oil, and you just need a smear across there, hardly anything at all. And then we turn over the first one onto the next, and do the same again. Just a smear, not even covering all the sheet. And we keep doing this until we get down to the bottom one. The oil keeps the pastry separate, making it puff up once it's in the hot oven. Now we add our filling, putting it on the near side of the pastry and allowing space all round to fold over in a moment. We make sure we don't overload because it'll burst out in the oven. That's it. And finally, our pièce de résistance, the blue vein cheese, and we just crumble a few fragments. That's all it takes. A few crumbles like this, quite enough to make the big difference. And now we parcel it up, simply folding up the ends, fold the ends in, and then take the bottom and roll it over till it finishes up on its seam. The last brush of oil on the baking tray. Just a slight amount. On it goes, and it's into the oven. About 190 or 200 degrees, and it is likely to announce when it's ready. The aromas will fill the kitchen. And the perfect complement to apple and blue cheese strudel is an Australian Noble Semillon, small glass. Bon appetit. Hello again. Consuming Passions is about food and making food fun to prepare, using good ingredients, and the key is simplicity. From one basic recipe can spring a variety of dishes, like the bread we looked at before. That same bread dough can be used for many things, including pizzas. And pizzas needn't be confined to the savoury variety. In Italy, a favourite is a sweet dessert pizza, schiacciata. It's made with these grapes. It's true, a simple combination of grapes and bread dough to make a tasty, inexpensive dessert. Here's how. The basic dough is just a simple combination of flour, yeast, a little salt and oil, water, well mixed, and then kneaded, which is where we get some exercise. Apart from the bread dough, you'll need brown sugar and grapes. Any grapes will do. I tend to use red and white grapes together for visual impact. Wash them and mix them up with some raw sugar. I use them whole, seeds included, because I don't mind the crunchiness. But if you prefer, you can use the seedless variety or get a friend to seed them for you. Mix well and put to one side. You'll need to prepare a pizza tray or similar. I just smear it with a little light olive oil. Once oiled, we make a surface covering of plain flour and begin work on the dough. This has been proving for about an hour. It's ready to be bashed into shape, or rather two shapes, for our pizza sandwich. We just need the air that has risen to cause the dough to rise. Cut it in two. Start to make our first shape. This will only need to be a rough circle. Rough enough is good enough. Then put the dough onto the pizza pan, folding in the edges. See how rough that is? Doesn't matter at all. And then I start putting in the grapes, spreading them around a bit. Leaving space in between the grapes for a reason you'll soon see. And I sprinkle a little brown sugar on the top. And we come to our second piece of dough, which in effect will be making a grape sandwich. Seal the edges, just press them together. And press the dough around the grapes that are already there. And now I'll put on a second layer. These grapes will fall into those little crevices, little valleys. Doesn't that look wonderful? And just a little more sugar. And it's into the oven, hot oven, 220 degrees Celsius, for about 45 minutes. While that's cooking, time to make the perfect accompaniment to schiacciata, a little ricotta delight. A little ricotta cheese, which is a low-fat cheese, with a few chopped mixed nuts, and some Australian honey. I like red gum for this. It's light, low in fat, and tastes superb. When you smell the yeasty, grapey aromas coming from your oven, it's your schiacciata telling you it's ready. Just remains to take it out and serve. It smells every bit as good as it looks. The grapes have caramelized with the sugar on top and juicy grapes underneath. From Italy, schiacciata served with a little ricotta delight. Absolutely perfect. To complete the picture, a little sémillon, Sauterne style, to go with this beautiful dessert. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. Hello, today in Consuming Passions, I'm going to make a cobbler. Not the fish, and certainly not the shoe repairer. This one's a recipe from America's deep south, and it's soul food. It's a dessert like a pie, but I find it quicker and easier to make than a pie, and it certainly takes the pain out of pastry making. It relies for its success on two fruits, one fresh, one canned. The fresh ones, the apple, the canned ones, the peach, and this is how simple to make. Into a large bowl, I grate the zest of a lemon. This will add tang to this sweet flang. And then I squeeze in the juice of that lemon to add some tartness. I'm also using some tart apples, some Granny Smiths. Any other tart apple will do. And you'll notice that I'm keeping on the skins, so I discard the best part. These go into the bowl, and it's all shaken up with some enthusiasm. Now to add some other ingredients. A little corn flour, a couple of teaspoons, some cinnamon, a generous teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 4 or 5 cloves, and some sugar, just a couple of tablespoons of raw sugar or a soft brown sugar, that would be fine. And this again is shaken. Of course, you could do this just by stirring it with a spoon, but it wouldn't be as much fun, would it? I'm going to bake the cobbler in a high-sided pie dish, which I've greased with a little polyunsaturated margarine. I now put in the apple mixture, pack that in tightly, and pile on the peaches, canned Australian peaches, of course, because they're the peachiest. Just spread those over and pack the whole thing well down. It doesn't matter if there's some of the liquid from the can going in there, it'll help make the whole thing moist. And now I make the cobbler dough. Using the same bowl, why not, a bit of labor saving, a cup of flour. I'm using plain flour, but you could use wholemeal. A couple of teaspoons of baking powder, sprinkled in. And then I cut in some polyunsaturated margarine that's been chilled. It's about a tablespoon here. Cut that in and then knead the mixture so that it becomes crumbly. I don't want to overwork this. It just needs to be light and airy, and not a paste. And once that's been well mixed together, I just stir in some low-fat milk, about ½ a cup, and make this into a fairly firm dough at this stage. All I have to do then is to take dollops of the dough and put them on top of the fruit. Of course, you could have actually rolled this out like pastry, but then it takes all the fun of doing this dish out, and it wouldn't become a cobbler, it would become a pie. This is much nicer, much easier, much quicker. You don't need to cover the top. These spaces will be good to let out steam. A light sprinkling of sugar, and it's into the oven. Into the oven, 190 degrees for about 40 minutes until the top is a beautiful golden brown. I can't wait, but I have to, so I'm going to make a little sauce to go with the cobbler. A simple sauce based on the English custard or crème anglaise recipe, but low fat. 2 egg yolks. I mix in a tablespoon of caster sugar and keep stirring that until the sugar has dissolved. Then I add a little vanilla essence, about half a teaspoon, and a teaspoon of corn flour. Mix it all well, and when it's thoroughly creamed together, I add about a cup of boiling low-fat milk, stirring all the time. And once that's well mixed, it goes back into the saucepan. Keep it cooking, but it mustn't boil, just simmer until it thickens to the thickness of a custard. Once that's done, pour it back in the bowl, keeping stirring all the time, and is covered with plastic wrap until needed. That will stop skin forming. When it's time to serve the apple and peach cobbler, just spread a little of that wonderful custard onto a dish and serve a portion of this beautiful soul food. Final garnish of mint, and there it is, an American dish given the Australian treatment, apple and peach cobbler. If you'd like the recipe for this, just write to Consuming Passions, ABC Television, Box 9994 in your capital city, enclosing a self-addressed stamped envelope. Cobbler may be served hot or cold, summer or winter. Perfect dish. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit, y'all.